Welcome to Don's Manufactory. Well, bad news. Well, here's the clip from the last video where I showed the toe out. But indeed, this is just a parallax error from the camera perspective. Not realizing this error is why I bought a bump steer kit. More on that later. I'll tell you, it's off further than I thought. The suspension is set up with 4 degrees of caster and 0 camber. Let me show you the setup first. I've got a jack stand with some construction type line on here so that it's just barely touching the rear and the front of that tire. And it comes forward to another jack stand. I'm just eyeballing it to get it in the ballpark, and I'm setting it for 0 toe. I made a 1/2 inch spacers for the upper shock mount. That's just so that the suspension can't drop down as far as would normally be, and to give it a bit more center to travel on the shock a bit more. You can see I've got my threaded rod set up here, angle iron, wing nut, and so I can adjust the suspension up and down. No springs, of course. It's a pretty easy procedure here, just to measure from the tip of that over to the tip of the other one, then move the suspension 1 inch and remeasure. Well, that method doesn't work at all. All it does is measure the arc of the spindle. You know, the wheels are moving in and out and traveling the arc of about 3/4 of an inch anyway, so I went out and looked at how other people were doing it, even manufacturers of rack and pinion steering units, and they're doing it wrong too, so they don't have any good data. So this is null and void. So here's my bump steer check. What I have is plumb bobs with little points on them, pointing down at a measurement here on the floor. I don't, there's an arc to the spindle, so it's whether they move out and back together, that's what determines the toe angle. It's the difference between front and rear. You'll see that I've got scales. I built 2 boards here that have rulers on them, and they're made exactly the same, so I can actually check absolute toe as well as relative toe. Right now I have it set to exactly 1/16 inch of toe on both sides. Alright, and then I've got my laser down here that's running down the center line of the car so that I could put my boards exactly where they belong. So, over here, same story. I will be able to log the motion of each side of the suspension independent of each other, as well as the total together. So when I'm checking toe, it's individual toe. I have a 1/16 on both sides. That gives me an 1/8 inch toe in. So I will now begin to map caster, camber, and toe, and the readings off of these rulers, which I'll put into a chart, and then that will automatically figure my toes, and we'll just see if this data is any more accurate than the last rounds of data, which were not all that accurate. Okay, here we go. Here's my setup. I've got 2 digital gauges, one for camber, one for caster, and let's get a look at the next round of data. So, looking at the toe column, you can see that it has a max of 1/16 of an inch of toe out with compression on the suspension. And this is using the stock tie rod ends. You can see in the camber column that in that 3 inches of compression that I'm getting about 2.5 degrees of camber change, negative camber curve. So that's not too bad for a high sidewall tire. If you were running a 18-inch rim with a wide tire and doing a wide body kit, I'd probably stop at maybe 3/4 of an inch for the Shelby drop and only get maybe 1.5 degrees in that 3 inches of travel. That would probably make it handle better with a lot less wear on a wide performance tire. But don't quote me on that. Do your own testing. I'll get the rest of this data populated in my chart here and I'll publish that when the time comes. If you have any questions about the data that's listed here, just put it in the comments down below and I'll answer them as best I can. So it's got just a touch of understeer. So in a hard corner, it will be towed out or will understeer a 1/16 on this side and on the other side. Bump steer kit. This is from Total Control Products. Now, one thing to note is that this joint will not fully extend the suspension. So having the shocks out and having the weight of the wheel and stuff on it will damage that joint. Angle test of how many degrees of movement this spherical joint in the bump steer kit has. So let's just move it all the way to the top, whatever that ends up being right there. Zero it, move it down, and it looks like, well, we're gonna call that, there it goes. If I turn it just the right way, I can get just over 39, but we're going to call that 39 degrees is the absolute maximum, but really it should be slightly less than that, probably in the nature of 37 to be safe. I haven't been trying to overshoot these joints. See right there? See that little print? Right? There's a little print. Let me hold it. I don't know if you can see it or not. There's a little print right there. That was when it hit the bottom of the travel and the joint printed the spacer. Basically, the principle this operates at is this goes into your arm on your spindle. See, there's the taper. So it goes right up into that. And then you just move spacers from here to this side or vice versa in order to raise or lower that center point of movement. That spherical joint is 90 degrees when it's at the top of its suspension travel, and that should not be. It should have an angle to it. Because what's happening is when the suspension is all the way down, I'm running out of angle on this joint. And the only way to fix that I can see is I would have to put a bend in the inner tie rod so that it approaches this spherical joint with a downward angle, and then at ride height it would be horizontal, and then when it was all the way down the suspension could completely extend. Hello, welcome to Don's Manufactory. Hey, you can tell by looking at me, we had a sunny day in Oregon. Yay! Haven't had one since, but I did have to take advantage of it. I am not done gathering data about the car and the suspension and all the stuff. I've got the suspension back, the steering links back to normal. I took the bump steer that I bought, I took that off because it was way too much. And I've kind of decided I wanted a bit of understeer. I'm still mapping my suspension, trying to figure out what I want to do, if everything's going to be okay. And anyway, so thanks for sticking around. I promise I'll get this data out to you once I'm convinced that it's accurate and the real deal, and this is what these cars really do. I finished mapping the passenger side in the Shelby drop mode. Now I'm going to pull the upper control arm and put it in the stock position, get an alignment on it, and then sweep it through so I can figure out what's happening in stock configuration. Anyway, Just lots of work to do. I just can't believe how long this stuff takes, gathering all this data. Ah! Okay. Thanks for watching. Later.